And we're going to be continuing in deceptions concerning Yahweh's calendar of events. And it's going to be kind of a challenge a little bit because we've got two different versions of the book. We've got the old version and we've got the new version, and the page numbers don't quite match up. So what we did is we left off on about page 19 of the new book, which I think is right around page 18 of the red covered book. And we left off around where we're talking about 18, 19, Yahweh's Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Now, if you kind of remember what the Great Khan was covering last week, that these, Yahweh's calendar of events, it's a calendar of special occasions, it's a calendar of events when Yahweh says that He is going to be with us at the appointed time. And it's very important for us to remember these things. One of the basic things that we run into a lot of times is, especially in dealing with the Sabbaths, worldly people will tell you, well, does it really matter? Does it really matter if we worship on the seventh day of the week or the first day of the week or the fifth day of the week? What does it really matter? Does it really matter at all? Well, Yahweh's answer to that is absolutely, positively, yes, it does. And if you turn over to Exodus chapter 31, if you have your book of Yahweh, Exodus 31, I've actually got it here. Exodus 31, and verse 13, there it says, "Speak also to the children of Israel, saying, Surely my Sabbaths ye shall keep." Now notice the importance that Yahweh places on His Sabbaths there. "For they are a sign between me and you throughout your generations." Notice it's a continual, it's a perpetual covenant. It's never ending throughout your generations, that you may know that I am Yahweh, who sanctifies you and who makes you holy. Now, there's a side note there, R2. You can see that there, and notice what it says there. It says the Sabbath is a mark of a distinction. Notice, it's a mark. The Sabbath is a mark. It is, the Sabbath days and the feast days are a mark that you belong to Yahweh. How important is that, man? Would you say that's pretty important? Praise Yahweh, because we either have the mark of Yahweh or we have the mark of Satan, right? One of the two. So it's the Sabbath day is a mark of distinction. It's a mark of distinction between Yahweh and His people in the relationship. Notice, in the relationship that exists between them. See, it sets up the parameters of a relationship with our Heavenly Father. And that is the fact, and this is a fact, it's not conjecture, it's not a theory, but it is a fact. Look at that there. It shows it is a fact that Yahweh has chosen His people. We're here, and we have been given these Sabbaths. We've been given the feast days, when the fact that Yahweh has chosen His people, notice, by letting them inherit, by allowing us to inherit inherit for rest the very day on which He rested. Behaving, taking on His image, taking on His likeness, behaving just like Him. And notice that is, it was allowed. We were allowed to do that. And that is the importance of these appointed times. And it's not something that, it's something that the world blows away. It's something that they just kind of glass over, that they don't lay any importance on. But see, that's the deception of Satan. That is part of the deception, because Satan does not want us or anybody to take on the mark of Yahweh. She wants everybody to have her mark. And Revelation 12:9 shows very clearly that the entire world does have her mark, except for this select group here, and those who are turning, and those whom Yahweh has called and invited to His house, because He wants us to be here. That's why we're here. Okay, but no, Yahweh's feasts are at His appointed time. On page 19 or page 18, the Yahweh's Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Great Khan, he showed here in Leviticus 23, verses 4 through 6, He said, these are the feasts of Yahweh. They are his feasts. His holy convocations, which shows, he showed that, he pointed out that Yahweh takes ownership. These feasts, they're owned by Yahweh. These are his feasts, which you shall proclaim at their appointed seasons and to be there. We're commanded to be there 3 times a year. We're commanded to be at the place Yahweh has chosen for these 3, as the Great Kahan mentioned last week, pilgrimage feasts. For the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Tabernacles. And we've got to remember why we come to these feasts. We come to these feasts to learn how to reverence Yahweh. That's the whole reason for coming to the Sabbath days. That's the whole reason for the feast days, is learn to reverence Yahweh. To learn how to take on that righteous character. And again, to take on that mark. And Satan does not want us to do that at all. She wants to do anything and everything that she can to keep us from attaining that. Now, on the next page, on page 20, the statute of Yahweh's sacred year. It says Exodus 23:15. Exodus 23:15, shows Yahweh's appointed times for his appointed feasts, that they must begin with the moon of Abib, which begins his count to his holy convocations. Now look at this word appointed. Look at the word appointed. Look what the word appointed means. The word appointed means to fix or set officially. Okay, look at this. Officially. To name officially. To decide or to establish something in an official way. You see something here in common with this word appoint. It's something that is done in an official way. It's official. And it also means to decide on, usually from a position of authority. Now that word official means prescribed or recognized as authorized. Prescribed or recognized as authorized. From a position of authority. Notice the next definition there of official. A person who has a position of authority in a company, in an organization, in a government, in the kingdom of Yahweh. See, Yahweh establishes how he wants his feasts kept. On how he wants his people gathered together. He leads, guides, and directs his people in exactly what he wants them to do. And he doesn't leave us guessing as to what it is that we need to do. He outlines these things in his laws, statutes, commandments, and his judgments, and in these ordinances that tell us how to carry these things out. And the world minimizes these things and says, oh, we don't need to do it this way. We've got a better way to do it. And we're going to see, as we get further into this, what their better way, what their so-called better way is, and just how confusing and how difficult they made something which is so simple. But when they changed those things, they changed these appointed times that Yahweh said, this is how I want them done. And they said, no, we're not going to do it that way. We're going to do it this way. Well, by what authority did they do that? We've read the publications. It's in. Pastor has quoted these scriptures many different times. Or not the scriptures, but these letters many times about who changed the appointed times, who had the authority. By what authority did you do these things? You Roman Church, why did you do these? By what authority? And they said, well, if we didn't have the authority, then we wouldn't have been able to do it. Nobody else would have followed us. See, they came in their own authority. Just like Yahshua said, but let somebody come in my own name, in their own name, and they will be accepted. And you see, that's exactly what took place. But yet we come in the name, but the last day's witness comes in the name of Yahweh, and then everything else, everything he teaches, except for those whom Yahweh is calling, is rejected. Just like Yahshua said it would be. And just like it was in the days of Yahshua, just like it was, throughout the 6,000 years of man's history. But we must understand fully, Pastor shows here, what is meant when the scripture says the month or the moon of Abib. For the moon of Abib is the starting place for the appointments when Yahweh says his eyes and heart will be at his house. It's the starting point. Everything else hinges upon following these ordinances, following these statutes, following these laws correctly so that Yahweh will be here with us. And Pastor, I love how he puts this next paragraph down. I mean, think about this. Think about this in because everybody, I think, at some point has experienced these things here. What Pastor's getting ready to explain. And you think about what Yahweh is doing, and Yahweh has gone through the trouble of inviting people to his house to come and meet with him, and then they don't show up. But look what Pastor says here. He says, have you ever made plans with a close friend to meet at a certain place at an appointed time, but they didn't show up, they didn't arrive? And he asked a simple question. Do you remember how you felt? Were you exceedingly glad that the person didn't show up? Or was there a sense of loss? Did you have a sense of were you let down? Did you have a sense of extreme disappointment? Sadness even when somebody didn't show. And Pastor makes a point here, and he says, Yahweh is our closest friend. Yahweh is our closest friend. He is our protector, our teacher, and our heavenly Father. Yet at the appointed times that he sets, many of his family don't show up to meet with him at the place he chooses to place his name. You think about that. And that goes not just for the 3 feasts, not just for the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the Feast of Weeks, and the Feast of Tabernacles. It's not just that. What about the weekly Sabbaths? Yahweh's eyes and heart are here at that appointed time perpetually, right? He meets with us he's here present with us on the Sabbath. Remember when Adam and Eve, they didn't meet their appointment, and he was looking, they were, where are you? Where have you been? You weren't at services. Yahweh's beginning account to his appointment and his set time was written for his people in Exodus 12, 1 through 2. And Yahweh said to Moshe and Aaron, in the land of Egypt, this moon shall be the beginning of moons. That shall be the first moon, or be the first moon of the year to you. Okay, so remember what the importance of those, remember what the importance of the feast days are. That the Sabbath, remember the Sabbaths are that mark of distinction. Remember that those Sabbaths are a mark of distinction. Okay, the Sabbath is that mark of distinction between Yahweh and his people and that relationship that exists between them. And in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 5, remember we are to seek the habitation of Yahweh, the place which Yahweh your Father shall choose out of all of your tribes to establish his name, and there you must go. See, so there's no question about what we're supposed to do, about where we're supposed to go. Now, the Hebrew word translated moon is, chodesh, and means new moon. And it comes from the word kadash, which means to build or to rebuild or to renew. So, even as something as simple as a new moon, do you know what the world considers a new moon? Any idea? I got a picture of it. Right there. That's the world's new moon. You see it? That's their new moon. There's nothing there. How can you see what's not there? You can't. But that is the world's new moon. There's Yahweh's new moon. That's the new moon Yahweh's way. And that is what we look for when we're called to gather together for Yahweh's new moon. This is what we look for. You know how important the difference between that and that? It seems like a small thing, but it's extremely important. That can last for a couple of days. So which day would they choose, according to the world, if they were looking for the moon that way? Of course they're not. They totally reject the moon, and they use the sun. But that moon right there, that new moon Yahweh's way, is what we are to diligently look for. And it's that new moon in that appointed time that Yahweh sets up for us to look for, this new moon of green ears that properly sets that cycle for everything else to follow throughout the rest of the year. Now, Pastor shows here, he continues here, he shows that the Hebrew word translated year is Shana, and that means a revolution of time, plus a whole age, long plus old year. Shana comes from the root word Shana, which means to fold over, to duplicate, to repeat, to return, or to do a second time. Exodus 23:15 shows that Yahweh's sacred year begins on his first appointment every year on his Passover on the 15th day of the moon of Abib, or the green ears of barley, which is the first moon of Yahweh's sacred year to us. Exodus chapter 12, verses 1 through 2. And Yahweh's sacred year ends with his last appointed time in the end of Yahweh's sacred year on the last great day. So that is Yahweh's sacred year. That is a year Yahweh's way. In Leviticus 23:39 it says, So beginning on the 15th day of the seventh moon, when you've gathered the fruit of the land to keep Yahweh's feast for 7 days, on the first day there shall be a Sabbath, a holy convocation, and on the 8th day, the last great day, a Sabbath, a holy convocation. Leviticus 23:16 shows the feast of ingathering, the feast of tabernacles, which is at the end of the year, when you have gathered in the fruit of your labors from the field. The last appointed time, the last holy convocation of Yahweh's feast ends his sacred year, and that is the last great day. The last great day is the last of Yahweh's appointments in its season. At the next new moon of green ears of barley, let me back up here. The last great day is the last of Yahweh's appointments in its season. At the next new moon of green ears of barley, the following spring. Yahweh does not concern himself. Now notice this. Yahweh does not concern himself with the sun's position on the horizon, and he commands his people not to be concerned with the sun. And anywhere in the scriptures does it ever tell us to look at the sun, at the position of the sun, in order to set Yahweh's feasts? The sun's not even mentioned when it comes to setting up the appointed times for keeping the feasts. It's not what it's for. Yahweh sets his appointed seasons according to the agricultural conditions, and then only with the harvesting conditions which he himself brings to pass. So you see, this is why these are Yahweh's feasts, because Yahweh controls the firmament. He controls the climate. He controls the rain. He controls the weather conditions. He's got control over those things. And these feasts are going to occur when Yahweh says, okay, I want to schedule my feast now. And he commands the microorganisms to do the things that they need to do in order to bring that about. Okay, so Yahweh is in complete control there. Yahweh's sacred year begins when the agricultural condition brings on the green ears of barley in the spring, which will proclaim the new moon of green ears of barley. Then, 7 moons later, at the agricultural condition when the crops and the vintage have been harvested, Yahweh commands his Feast of Tabernacles ingathering. So you see, if that first moon is not set correctly, if it's not done in the order and in the manner in which Yahweh prescribes, then the rest of his sacred year is going to be off. And then none of those feasts kept during that time period would be Yahweh's feast, because they would not be set according to his way. And so while looking for the new moon and looking for the green ears of barley and new moons, why it may seem like a trivial thing, it's a very serious thing that the world trivializes and does away with. And it's again because Satan does not want you meeting here. Satan does not want you meeting with Yahweh at the appointed times. And this is one of the ways, one of the deceptions that she brought about in order to separate mankind from Yahweh. You see how she devised and planned and schemed, not only to hide the name of Yahweh, but also to separate, the extent that she's gone to try to separate mankind from Yahweh. It's really amazing when you look at it and just how hard that she has worked and the subtleness with which she has done things. But we see here, within Yahweh's sacred year, Yahweh has established all of his appointed feasts, which we are to duplicate, repeat, or return to meet Yahweh at his appointed times, at his holy convocations in their seasons. So now we see the green ears of barley. This is on page 22. I'm not sure what page it is on the red book. On the blue book, it's 22. It says, the green ears of barley. In the story of the Exodus from Egypt, or the history, we can put it this way, it's the history of the Exodus from Egypt, Yahweh brought 10 plagues on that land. And one of those plagues was thunder, hail, and lightning, as Exodus 9:22 through 25 says. We find that the barley was the first of the grains to have ears. In other words, it was the first to sprout. It was the first to begin to ripen. In Exodus 9:31 to 32, now the flax and the barley were destroyed in the hail, since the barley was in the green ear and the flax was in the bloom. But the wheat and the spelt were not destroyed, because they ripened later. And that should be a picture of what a stalk of barley looks like. So the fruits of the land of Israel are listed in Deuteronomy 8:8, and it says a land of wheat and barley, vines, fig trees, pomegranates, a land of olive oil and honey. In the Encyclopedia Judaica, Volume 6, page 1312, tells us about first fruits. And it shows here that the first fruits, that portion of the fruits of each year's harvest, that following the biblical injunction, was to be taken to the temple in Jerusalem. So, following the prescribed laws, following these prescribed ordinances, that these things were to be taken. In the Bible, it says, in the Bible, the Hebrew term, I'm not even going to try it, bikurim, and related terms for the first fruits derive from the same root as bakor, or firstborn, on the same general principle, and that the firstborn of man and beast belonged to Yahweh and were devoted to him. The first fruits, including the first grains to ripen each season, were brought as an offering to Yahweh. So we see here, and then Pastor shows here, he says, which of the fruits of the land is the very first of all of the fruits? Exodus 9:31 shows us it's barley. The barley was in the ear, and it was destroyed. The wheat and the spelt were not destroyed, for they do not ear until after the barley. Exodus chapter 23, verse 9 specifically shows Yahweh's appointed feast to begin their count from the new moon of Abib, the new moon of green ears of barley. So you see how specific Yahweh is in pointing out what season, what appointed time that we are to begin looking for that new moon in order to properly set the feast. Okay? Exodus chapter 23, verse 15 says, you shall keep the feast of unleavened bread. You shall eat unleavened bread 7 days, as I command you, as I commanded you at the time appointed of the moon of green ears of barley, Abib. For in it you came out of Egypt, and none of you shall appear before me empty. The Hebrew word Abib actually means green ears of barley, as Gesenius Hebrew and Chaldee Lexicon of the Old Testament Scripture shows on page 5, and you can see that, ear of corn, a green ear. Then the barley was in the ear, that is, the ears were developed. And then it shows the next underlined thing in there is the month of green ears, or that moon of green ears. So we see here now, the next part of this now is green ears. Where? Where are we to look? In Exodus chapter 12, Yahweh spoke to Moshe and Aaron and began teaching them in the ordinances of the Passover. Yahweh instructed them on how to observe it, when to observe it, and Yahweh told them where to observe it. In Exodus 12, 24 through 25, and you shall observe this thing as an ordinance for you and your sons forever. Okay, it's never ending. It wasn't until the book of Matithia was written, the end of Malachi everything was supposed to be kept up until then, turn the page, and okay, it's all done. We don't have to do that anymore. Now, it's to be observed as an ordinance for you and your sons forever. When you've come into the land which Yahweh will give you, just as he promised, that you shall observe this ceremony. Yahweh gave his instructions and told them to observe the Passover when they arrived in the land of Israel. Therefore, one can only search for the green ears of barley in the land of Israel, and then only from the latitude of Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Now, if you take a look at Isaiah, chapter 2, verse 3, we can see that there. We can start there in verse 2. And it shows it will come to pass that in the last days that the mountain or the promotion of the house of Yahweh will be established, or as one great Kahan puts it, it has been established, in the chief of the nations, and will be raised above all congregations, and all nations will eventually flow to it. And many people will go and say, come and let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh, to the house of the father of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. Notice, for the law will depart from Zion, and the word of Yahweh will depart from Jerusalem. Men, we've got to remember our history, okay? We've got to remember the history. What did Yahshua say in Yachanan chapter 4? Let's take a look. What did Yahshua say in Yachanan chapter 4? Yahshua said to her, woman, believe me, the hour comes when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. So is Yahweh with the people there in Jerusalem? Is Yahweh with the people there in Mount Zion? Okay. All right, so, like I said, we got to remember our history. Remember what Zechariah 8 says? This is what Yahweh of hosts says. Let your hands be strong, you who hear in these days these words by the mouth of the prophets, which were in the day that the foundation of the house of Yahweh of hosts was laid, that the temple might be rebuilt. Okay, remember when the temple was destroyed, when the house of Yahweh was destroyed in Jerusalem? It was in 70 AY, right? And remember, Zion was plowed like a field. It says, for before those days there was no reward or salvation from Yahweh for man, because the mouths of the ones to preach the reward, the salvation from Yahweh, were silent. They were silenced. Neither was there any peace because of the enemy who turned every man each against his brother. Okay? Remember the history of the 10 persecutions. Remember the history of that in the lost faith of the apostles and prophets. Okay, remember the 10 persecutions began with the disciples, right? After the death of Yahshua, remember? The first persecutions took place, and there was a progression from the time of Yahshua, from the time that first house of Yahweh was established under the authority of the apostles, all the way up through the last persecution, the 10th persecution, which took place under the Emperor Diocletian in 305 AY. And it was at that time that the house of Yahweh was completely destroyed, completely wiped out, wiped off the face of the earth as an established organization. It didn't exist. It was done. It was gone. There was no salvation, just like it was prophesied here in Zechariah. It wasn't there. So remember, that came to pass in 305 AY. So why was the house of Yahweh established? Why was the house of Yahweh established in the last days? Go back to Isaiah chapter 2. Okay, remember, put these things together, man. And it will come to pass that in the last days that the mountain or the promotion of the house of Yahweh will be established. And the prophecy was it will be established. It has been established. Notice where? In the chief of the nations. And will be raised above all congregations, and all nations will eventually flow to it. Remember, the house of Yahweh was wiped out. If the house of Yahweh continued, if it was in continuous existence, why would there be a need to reestablish it? Okay? There was absolutely a need to reestablish it. And it was reestablished in the last days, in this time period known as the last days, and we've gone through, Pastor has gone through that a multitude of times. The prophetic word, this current prophetic word that is out, the first Roman month of this year talks about it. The 12th Roman month of last year, 2018, covered that in detail also concerning the time period of the last days. And this last generation, when this last generation began in 1934, with the invention, with the patent that was filed with the nuclear weapon, or with the nuclear explosion by Leo Szilard, remember? Took place on the 7th Roman month, the 4th day of 1934. Yeah, I had to stop and think. Wait a minute, what was the year? But that identified that time period. And so you had that work that began with Satan beginning to bring about the ability to destroy all flesh off the face of the earth. But you also had the birth of the last day's witness. It took place at the same time, and these parallel works were working at the same time. And we see another prophecy concerning, and there's a multitude of prophecies concerning the establishment of the house of Yahweh and who would do it and the names of the witnesses. But one thing that I really would need to take a look at here is look at Revelation chapter 7. Revelation chapter 7. And I saw another Malach ascending from the east. And remember, this is one of the prophecies. So if the Malach was ascending from the east, the direction it was headed was west, having the seal of the living Father. Now, what is that seal? What is the seal of Yahweh? Look at the verse right below that one there. 2 Timothy 2:19. Nevertheless, the foundation of Yahweh stands sure, having this seal, the seal of Yahweh. Yahweh knows those who are his, because everyone who reverences the name of Yahweh departs from iniquity. So this Moloch that was ascending from the east, going west, had that seal of departing from iniquity. And he was one of the two that established the house of Yahweh according to prophecy. And the reason the house of Yahweh was established, of course, is to bring the warning, to bring a warning of what sin brings. But the house of Yahweh had to be reestablished in the last days. Okay? And that going from the east. Remember, I remember Pastor giving the sermons, and he said, if you take a look at where Jerusalem is, or more correctly, where Abelin, Israel, is, and if you draw a line from Abelin, Yisrayl, and you go west, you're going to run right into Abilene, Texas. It's on the same latitude. It's in the same latitude. And remember, this is what Pastor showed back here. He said one can only search for the green ears of barley from the latitude of Mount Zion in Jerusalem. We're at the same latitude as they are over there. So you see how that has come together. Now, what about Mount Zion in Jerusalem? Surely that identifies the place, right? Take a look at the 16th book of Yisrayl, chapter 5. The 16th book of Yisrayl, chapter 5. And we'll go ahead and read there in 41. And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths, because the laws will depart from Zion. Now that word, Pastor says, was Mount Moriah. And you should know all of these things now. It would make it simpler if you'd remember these things. Mount Zion was originally Mount Moriah, and it came to be known that because of Yahweh's house. It became to be known of that because of Yahweh's house. It came to be known as those who lift up holy hands to Yahweh. That word is Zion. Those who lift up holy hands to Yahweh. The Hebrew word Zion means, again, those who lift up, the Hebrew word Zion means those who lift up and keep the 613 laws. This is counted as merit to the one who does them. That's how come they changed the name from Moriah. It became to be known as Zion from Yahweh's people and came to refer to as Yahweh's people. Where are Yahweh's people gathered today? Right here. According to prophecy, just as Isaiah 2:2 and Micaiah 4:1 and the other prophecies show. So that Mount Zion in Jerusalem, and remember what Jerusalem means? Remember what the word Jerusalem means? A priest who teaches or instructs to keep peace. So you see, men, where it's talking about, where it says that we are to look for the green ears of barley, it's where Yahweh has established his house. It's where Yahweh has established his house. Yahweh's house is not established in the land of Israel. Yahweh left that land years and years and years ago. The prophecy shows that. Yahshua prophesied that would take place. And Yahweh has chosen yet this place here, all according to prophecy. And see, and this is one of those things that Satan doesn't want you to know. This is one of those things she doesn't want you to understand. And we can go back through Isaiah chapter 2 again, and we can reread that with that understanding again. And it will come to pass in the last days that the mountain, or the promotion of the house of Yahweh will be established in the chief of the nations. And it will be raised above all congregations, and all nations will eventually flow to it. And many people will say, come and let us go up to the mountain of Yahweh, to that uplifting, to the house of the Father of Jacob, and he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For the law will depart from Zion. It departed from that land of Israel. And the word of Yahweh departed from Jerusalem. And it is now being taught here. It's not being taught there. It's being taught here. Praise Yahweh. So on the top of page 24 in the blue book here, it says, Yahweh leaves no doubt about where to look for the green ears of barley, nor about his special way of establishing the times when his eyes and his heart would be at the house of Yahweh at his appointed feasts. He leaves no doubt. There's no guesswork with Yahweh. He isn't going to tell us to do something and leave us guessing about what he wants us to do. And when we get it wrong, kind of laugh, say, nope, that wasn't it. Nope, that wasn't it. Boy, you're in trouble now. No friend, no true friend, no loving father would ever do that to their children. They're consistent. A loving parent, a loving father, a true friend is going to be consistent. They're going to be loyal. And they are going to leave you no doubt as to what they expect. But we see here that establishing those times when his eyes and his heart would be at the house of Yahweh at his appointed feast. So you can see the importance of these things. Only Yahweh sets a special way, for only Yahweh controls the weather that brings forth these green ears. One should be aware and familiar with the topic. Let's go down here too. It says, therefore one can only obey Yahweh by looking for the green ears of barley where he commands us to look. Yahweh's blessing of the green ears of barley is shown to his people only from Mount Zion and only from Jerusalem. Now remember what we just covered with those. The world doesn't have that knowledge. They don't know what you know concerning those things. It's a secret. It's something secret that has been given. It's a hidden thing. It has been given to those whom Yahweh is calling now. One day the entire world will know these things. Their eyes will be opened and they'll be able to understand these things. But to us, it's been given so we can qualify to be a part of this kingdom. Okay? Lunar, not solar. Yahweh's special way of setting his appointed times is also based on a lunar moon cycle for the count to Yahweh's appointed feast starts from the first day of the new moon of green ears of barley. Effectually, when the barley is in the green ear, the very next moon sighted is the new moon of green ears of barley. Okay? Pretty simple, right? The weather is right. We're looking for the barley to sprout, to come into the green ear. Then we look, okay, now we know the next new moon is going to be the first day of the first moon, and we can properly set the count to Yahweh's feast and properly set the rest of the year. That new moon is day 1 of the count to Passover. In Deuteronomy 16, verse 1, watch for the moon of the green ears of barley, Abib, and sacrifice the Passover to Yahweh your Father. For in the moon of green ears of barley, Yahweh your Father brought you out of Egypt by night. Okay, again, notice there's nothing in here. There's nothing in here at all about. There's nothing in here about the sun at all, about setting the feast by the sun. It's all based on the sighting of the new moon, sighting the green ears of barley, and then the moon, and then the new moon. Is there any question about that? It's pretty clear. It's pretty simple. It's pretty black and white. In Exodus 12, 1 through 3, and Yahweh said to Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this moon shall be your beginning of moons, and it shall be the first moon of the year to you. Speak to all the congregation of Israel, saying, on the 10th day of this first moon, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one for each household. And Exodus 12, verse 6, now you shall keep it until the 14th day of the same moon. The whole congregation of Israel shall kill it between the 2 evenings. Exodus 12:18, in the first moon, on the 14th day of the moon at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the moon at evening. Now notice here, Yahweh controls the agricultural conditions which bring on the green ears of barley, and Yahweh has appointed the moon for seasons. Appointed the moon to show when his people should gather in front of him at his holy convocations. And remember that appointed. Remember what that word appointed means. That word appointed means, just to rehearse real quick, it means to set officially, to fix or set officially, to name officially, to decide or establish something in an official way. So you see how he's doing this, how official it is. It's laid out to decide on usually from a position of authority. So again, it's Yahweh that controls all of these things. He is the ultimate authority in the universe. There's no authority above Yahweh. So he is that ultimate authority, and he alone decides when these agricultural events come about. Okay? In Psalm 104, verse 19, it says, he appointed the moon for seasons, and the sun knows it's going down. So you see what the moon was set for. The moon was set to determine the seasons. What does the world use to set the seasons? They use the suns. They use the equinoxes. They use the solstices. They use the solstices and the equinoxes. That's what they use to appoint. That's what they use to set their seasons by. Okay, the word translated seasons in the previous verse is word number 4150 in Strong's Hebrew Dictionary and means an appointment, a fixed time or season, a festival, conventionally a year, by implication an assembly as convened for a definite purpose. You see that? You see how it's talking? It's actually talking about a meeting, a gathering. Technically, the congregation, by extension, the place of meeting, also a signal. A signal, a sign. It's a mark. It marks the time, the proper time period for that meeting. If you have a business out in the world and you set an appointment, you set a date and a time for that appointment. Right? Yahweh does the same thing. He sets the date, he sets the proper date and the times for it. A place of solemn assembly, congregation, to set a solemn feast, to set a time appointed. The word translated seasons in Psalm 104:19 is the Hebrew word mawadah, and means appointment, a fixed time, specifically a festival, a conventional year. However, the year Mawadah defines the year Mowadia defines is not the Roman year of 12 months. Okay? Remember, Yahweh doesn't set the seasons, He doesn't set the months according to the cycle of the sun. It's all set in the 21st day of the 14th, in the 21st day of the fourth moon. In the first day of the first moon, on the 14th day of the seventh moon. You see, you never see it. Well, on the fourth day after the solar equinox, you'd never see that. You won't see it. We all know that the year we all know so well is a physical year that has nothing in common with the spiritual year of Yahweh, which begins in the first moon on Yahweh's Passover and ends in the seventh moon on the last great day. A spiritual year is a spiritual year within 7 moons. Okay, the word season Mowadia, by implication, means a calling together of Yahweh's people, as convened for a definite purpose. Technically, it means the congregation, and by extension, it means a place of meeting. As we've seen earlier in this article, Mowadia comes from the word ya'ad, which means to fix upon by agreement or appointment, to meet at a stated time, to summon, to meet together. Remember that Yahweh said to Solomon in 1 Kings 9, verse 3, that his eyes and his heart would be at the house of Yahweh perpetually. And remember that word perpetually means at the appointed times, at the official times. Therefore, the moon sets Yahweh's appointed times. In Psalm 104, verse 19, David said that Yahweh appointed the moon for its seasons. But in the same verse, Yahweh also inspired David to write that the sun knows it's going down. So that's going to be the next thing we're going to be getting into. The sun knows it's going down. And he asked a question. He asked, does this mean that the sun, as well as the moon, governs Yahweh's appointed times for his feasts? He says, most assuredly not. Psalm 104:19 says nothing about the sun setting any of Yahweh's feasts. And so there is Psalm 104, verse 19. Says, you appointed the moon for setting the feasts. The sun knows it's going down. You've got 2 separate things that are being talked about there. The moon is used to set the feast days, but the sun is used to differentiate something else. And we're going to get into that here in just a second. Where did I go here? My page has flipped on me. Okay. The Psalms translated and explained by Joseph Addison Alexander, Baker Book House, Grand Rapids, Michigan, page 425, tells us that the sun knows his setting. And we're just going to take a look here. It says, he made the moon for seasons. The sun knows its setting. Even the heavenly bodies have a reference to man's advantage. The moon is a measure of time, and the sun defines the period of active labor. The sun defines a period of active labor. The word translated seasons is the plural of the one translated set time, my Roman numerals aren't that hot. But you can see where it is there. All right, and it says the next underlined portion says that sun knows when and where to set, and it does not make the day with its attendant toils perpetual. This is a strong poetical description of an obvious and familiar fact, and no more presupposes a particular theory or system of astronomy. So, what does all that mean? Pastor explains it. He says the sun knows when and where to set, and does not make the day with its attendant toils perpetual or never-ending. Exodus chapter 12 shows us the role of the sun's going down when work ceases. In Exodus 12 verse 6, it says, and you shall keep it, that is the lamb, up until the 14th day of the first moon. Then the whole congregation of Israel shall kill it between the 2 evenings. The King James Version renders this phrase in the evening. However, the Pentateuch and Haftorahs by Hertz, as well as the Talmud and the historian Josephus, clearly explained what this phrase in Exodus 12:6 means. And it shows there at dusk, or better, toward even, literally between the two evenings. According to the Talmud, the first evening is the time in the afternoon when the heat of the sun begins to decrease, which is about 3 o'clock, and the second evening commences with sunset. Josephus relates that the Passover sacrifice was offered from the 9th to the 11th hour, that is between 3 and 5 p.m. The following scripture proves that the Passover lambs were killed between the two evenings. And we see that here in Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 5 through 6. You may not sacrifice the Passover lambs within any of your cities Yahweh your Father has given you, but only at the place that Yahweh your Father chooses to establish his name. There you must sacrifice the Passover at evening, at the going of the sun, between 3 p.m. and sunset, at the season when the barley was in the green ear that you came out of Egypt. Okay, so Pastor makes it's made pretty clear right there in Deuteronomy 16, 5 through 6. Another example of the lambs being slain in the afternoon is found in 2 Chronicles chapter 35, verses 1 through 2, and then 14. Then Yahshua kept the Passover to Yahweh in Jerusalem, and they killed the Passover lambs on the 14th day of the first moon. He assigned the priests to their responsibilities and encouraged them for their service of the house of Yahweh. After this, they prepared for themselves and for the priests, because the priests, the sons of Aaron, were busy offering burnt offerings and the fat until night. So the Levites prepared for themselves and for the priests, the sons of Aaron. Now, please note, Pastor shows here, he says the Aaronic priests and the Levites worked until night. They did not wait until night to start killing the Passover, as the churches and the assemblies will teach. And then 2 Chronicles 35, 16 through 18 says, so all the service of Yahweh was prepared the same day to keep or sacrifice the Passover lambs and to offer burnt offerings on the altar of Yahweh according to the commandment of King Yahshua. And the children of Israel who were present at that time prepared the Passover, and they kept the Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days. There was not a Passover compared to that kept in Israel since the days of Samuel the prophet. None of the kings of Israel kept such a Passover as Yahshua kept, with the priests, the Levites, and all of Judah and Israel who were present with the people of Jerusalem. Okay, in these previous verses, we see the Passover lambs were killed between 3 p.m. and sunset on the 14th day, not after sunset on the 13th day, as many are deceived into believing. In this context, at the going down of the sun between 3 p.m. and sunset, work was being done. The lambs were being killed on the holy mount. However, this work was not to be unending, and the priests had a goal of finishing the slaughtering of these lambs that day on the 14th day. For that following night, the 14th at sunset, the beginning of the 15th day, the people were to eat these same lambs. Okay? Yahweh set his days to be the night first and then the day. This is one day Yahweh's way. Okay? Take a look in Genesis chapter 1 here. And Yahweh called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and then the morning were the first day. Men, you can go through that all through Genesis chapter 1 and chapter 2 throughout the creation, and you can see, and then the evening and then the morning. The evening, then the morning. It's repeated over and over and over. So the day flows from evening to morning. Yahweh leaves no room. There's no doubt that that's how a day Yahweh's way goes. There's no doubt that that's how Yahweh's day goes. Let me see here. Okay, in Genesis 1:4, we see the dark and then the light were the first day. After the sun goes down, it disappears from sight. A new day, Yahweh's way, begins. Yahweh's holy convocations always start when Yahweh's way begins just after the sun disappears from sight. Now take a look at Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23. In verse 32 it says, "It is to you a Sabbath of rest, and you shall afflict yourselves on the 9th of the moon at evening, at the setting of the sun, through the 10th of the moon at evening, at the setting of the sun. From evening to evening you shall celebrate your Sabbath." So we're even told there in Leviticus chapter 23, that's specifically a Day of Atonement, but it's not anything different from any other day Yahweh's way. It's from evening to evening. It's the evening and then the morning, the evening then the day. That's how it runs. This is the only role, and I've got this starred here because this is the only role that the sun plays in Yahweh's ordinances of the sacred year. The sun knows when to set, and it begins and ends the day, Yahweh's way. The sun does not set the season appointed time of the holy convocations of Yahweh. It doesn't set those appointed seasons. It doesn't set those appointed times. But it marks the day of when a day begins and when it ends. That's it. That's what it does. Yahweh shows through his servant, the prophet Yirmiah, that this ordinance of the moon will never cease to exist. So it's not going to change from one way to another. It's not going to do that. Yirmiah 31, 35 through 36. This is what Yahweh says, "Who gives the sun for a light by day, and the ordinances of the moon and the stars for a light by night, who stirs up the sea so its waves roar. Yahweh of hosts is his name. If those ordinances depart from before me, says Yahweh, then the seed of Israel will also cease from being a nation before me forever." The nation of Israel, Pastor shows here, has not ceased to exist. The nation of Israel is a nation to this very day. The land of Israel in the Middle East, yes, it is there. But that nation does not use the ordinance of the moon to set their feasts. Does this mean that Yahweh's ordinance of the moon has departed from before him? No, absolutely not. Yahweh's people, notice this, Yahweh's people will obey Yahweh's ordinance of the moon to come together before him at his holy convocations. But those who are not Yahweh's people will try to avoid it, will try to avoid obeying Yahweh. And this is what has taken place throughout the world. In this calendar that we were given, it's amazing at how much deception went into this worldly calendar. It's amazing when you really sit and you really think about it. And there's a lot more than what we've covered so far. But Yahweh will only use his ordinances to be at the place that he chooses perpetually at his appointed feast, at his appointed season. Remember, to set them officially. To set and officially in an official way from a position of authority. Unless one uses Yahweh's ordinance of the moon to gather together, we might be there. We may be there, but Yahweh won't. That's why we're cautioned. That's why it's so very important that we follow these things and we learn. We learn these ordinances and we see just how subtle this deception is that's gone into the world, and that we understand the right and proper way to do these things. Men, it's about time to go ahead and close. So we'll stop here on Blue Book, page 30. Greg Kahan will pick up here where it says Yahweh's calendar. Where it picks up Yahweh's calendar. So with that, men, may Yahweh be with you and bless you. If everyone will stand, we'll go ahead and we'll close.